Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar. We will begin the presentation in approximately 1 minute. Hello, and welcome to Fanatics Ingests streaming data to a data lake on AWS. My name is Paul Sears, a partner solutions architect for Amazon Web Services, and I will be your host and moderator for today's presentation. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to join by either phone call or your computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your audio selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in the control panel. From this control panel, you also have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the chat box. We will collect the questions and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation, time permitting. Also, at the end of today's event is a brief survey, so please stay connected until the end of the broadcast and submit your feedback as your opinions count. Lastly, the PowerPoint presentation will be available through SlideShare along with a recording of the webinar on YouTube. You'll get this via an email that will be sent 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of this event, so keep an eye out for the follow-up email sent to the address you provided. Again, welcome to today's live webinar, Fanatics Ingest Streaming Data to a Data Lake on AWS. Again, my name is Paul Sears, Partner Solutions Architect for Amazon Web Services, and I will be your host and moderator for today's webinar. In addition to learning about AWS, we will also hear from Jordan Martz, Director of Technology Solutions for Attunity, and Alan Chang, Senior Product Manager for Fanatics. We will first talk about AWS and data lake solutions. We will next learn about moving data in real time with Attunity, and then Fanatics will share their story and insights. And time permitting, we'll close out with questions and answers. So please post your questions in the chat box throughout this presentation as we will review questions at the end of today's event. Today you will learn how to deploy a data lake on Amazon S3, how to ingest data in real time, and how to use AWS, Attunity, and Kafka to get more value from your data. So let's go ahead and learn about AWS. So to take a look at what a data lake looks like on AWS and how it drives business value, we need to first set the landscape and define what a data lake actually is. A data lake is a centralized repository that allows you to store all your structured and unstructured data at any scale. You can store your data as is without having to first structure the data and run different types of analytics from dashboards and visualizations to big data processing, real-time analytics, and machine learning to guide for better decisions. Traditionally, analytics was stored in a large data warehouse or a large relational database system. Often these systems were purpose-built hardware or appliances that were deployed within your data center. However, these systems are expensive to implement and maintain, and they face significant challenges with scaling. So what is another option? Another option is to build a data lake where you can ingest and store all of your data, structured or unstructured, in batch or real time, in a single large repository, and this repository becomes the source of truth for all of your data and analytics. By having all of your data in one place, you can discover insights that you may have missed when data is stored in different systems or in different silos. Implementing a data lake is the start of a journey to begin a data-driven business. You define your business outcomes working backwards to your modern data architecture. Along the journey, you can experiment and explore data in new ways while only paying for what you actually consume. And this enables agility, allowing you to quickly adapt to new data sources and deployment of your infrastructure in minutes instead of months. So now that you have decided on implementing a data lake, what do you want to do with the data? So data lakes can be designed in various ways, but you need to understand your business case first, and then work backwards through the analytics pipeline that you implement as a modern data architecture. The analytics pipeline allows you to experiment and scale as needed. With the analytics pipeline, you can ingest your data and store it into your data lake. You can then analyze or process the data to derive the results you require, and those results are then made available to consume or visualize. The data lake becomes the source that lets you derive your answers and insights, regardless of the kind of data that you want to use, such as monitoring data, ERP transactions, or even workflow logs. When you implement a data lake as part of a modern data architecture, you gain a number of beneficial business outcomes, such as consolidation of your data into a single source of truth. This allows you to innovate for new revenues by leveraging relationships of data that you wouldn't otherwise be able to use. Another outcome could be real-time engagement or an interactive and better customer experience, and building your analytics pipeline around your data lake facilitates automation across your organization. A data lake is a central component of a modern data architecture on AWS. It provides a single repository for all your relational and non-relational data. This repository is based on Amazon S3 as a store for the data lake, and it is a source that will be consumed by many highly interoperable services, such as ETL processes or services to query your data and tools that let you visualize your data in new ways to gain unique insights to drive your business forward. So why would you use Amazon S3 for your store and your modern data architecture? Amazon S3 is ideal to use as a data lake and as a core of a modern data architecture because it is extremely durable with 11 nines durability. Now, this is actually very important when you have hundreds of terabytes or more or petabytes of important data. You don't want to have your data altered or changed anytime during that life cycle. S3 is also designed to be highly available with up to 4 nines availability, so you can always access your data. In terms of scale, S3 is practically scaleless, and you can store as much data as you need, and more importantly, only pay for the amount of storage you are actually consuming. And by using Amazon S3 as your data lake, you are no longer limited with scale as you are with traditional data warehouses and relational database systems. One of the primary advantages of using this design is that storage and compute are no longer coupled together. In traditional data warehouses, to add more storage, you also have to add more compute by either upgrading the server hardware or adding more servers to the data warehouse cluster. This often results in some resources being underutilized. By decoupling compute from storage, you can scale each resource independently as appropriate for analytics workloads. And you will learn more about this shortly. So now I'm going to hand this over to Jordan of Attunity, who will now talk about how Attunity helps customers ingest data into the cloud.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. And really enjoy some of those images as well as some of the other ways that we've worked together over the past, oh goodness, since AWS has been created, I think it's been 7 years. So it's been wonderful having partners like Amazon and then having customers and partners like Fanatics to talk about the way that we work together. And I want to thank anybody in the audience for joining us. One of the things that we do at Attunity is we're based on the idea that our technology captures all these sources and collects them to be able to provide that fundamental data lake transformation that you see. And whenever you take that transformation, what you're looking to be able to provide is the database migration. These are our competencies. That's how I'll mark it. So when you look at it from the standpoint of who we are, we'll load into big data tools like Kinesis, S3, pull it off S3 and or even in S3, you can pull it into Elasticsearch and other components. You can pull it into Redshift as well. And that's where a lot of that big data story that Paul's been referencing has been not only built, but also expanded upon with all these real-time migrations from those, oftentimes we call them legacy, but just on-prem applications, your ERP, your CRM, they could be running on Oracle or SQL Server or all these different platform tools. So that becomes part of the migration. Further, you could take your mainframes, right? There's blog posts that you could go out to the APN and look at each one of those, as well as the ease of use of being able to develop in this overall ecosystem by just going to our marketplace, plugging in a license key, and get going to work on migrating your data to these data lakes. And as we talk about what we are and how we work with different platforms, what we're looking at is building a platform that allows you to take each pipeline, ETL job pipeline, as you think about it, we're a CDC, so CDC means it's a real-time tool set allowing you to move that. But when you have these key considerations, what you're looking at from these insights is being able to deliver that with some assurances. So the quality's there, the verification that it landed, some details of the governance, the way that you can not only verify, but what's there and how it got there. So understanding the automation, and that's one of the key things that Attunity brings, is key. You know, traditional data warehouse development takes a long time just to even get started, the development of different applications and the rest of those. So as you're building each one of those applications, you want to be able to generate a lot of the logic from those source systems or generate the actual table design and those things. So that's part of what Attunity does under the covers. It automates a lot of that. Also the considerations of data typing, right? And I'll talk about some of those. But then as you're looking at your business needs, a lot of the business needs, when you read those ETL toolkits, right? We're in this new world where a lot of the development of applications, they require you to understand how to move your data and how to address that from your business need. And if the business now is getting more real time, we're a very powerful component for making sure everything comes in real time. And that's where it ends off with that analytic ready data set that we took in there. Whenever you're looking at it, these are the considerations. I mark them by the 6 considerations, and I'm going to go into each one, but tell them as a story. So when you look at a different platform or building a data lake, all the data, whenever you're generating it and loading it, you want to make sure that it's in there. I mean, a lot of people are often talking, okay, well, is my report from yesterday? No, it's actually a minute ago that it got here. And it came through a process of landing the files. And there's some formats in S3 that we help handle and manage the way it lands. We also land it in memory. So we give that ability then to overwrite it and be able to, because it's immutable, right? They have to talk about the changes of it. So being able to constantly move data in with very little downtime and prepare that analytics ready data set becomes key. That's where you talk about some of that low latency capability. There's also the scale. We have customers with over 1 billion transactions every quarter coming into huge data lakes. And what you're looking at is the sources. They got hundreds of sources. So by a source, that's an entire database. So what we're looking at is the ability to efficiently scale the sources to hundreds and hundreds of different applications and bringing those all together. That scale makes it very easy to use. And that's one of the fundamental reasons people look at the platform. There's also the flexibility, right? So you get one tool, it's drag and drop. Now, as soon as you still have to configure the source system and do some natural configurations, but that flexibility of just going to a drop down saying, okay, I got an Oracle here, I got a SQL Server here, and I want to be able to take and then move that data type into S3, that's really powerful. There's also that UI giving you that drag and drop gives you a lot of time to value, and the fact that you can build jobs very efficiently and get them to market in a very, well, actually to market, to get them to your business customers very efficiently. And not having to manage that manual scripting often will handle for the future proofing of that. So I built data lakes. I wasn't always a sales guy and working for a vendor. When I was a developer and I was leading some of the applications and systems that we were building in the past, what we had to do was we'd have to write a lot of scripts to get things up and maintain them, and source systems would change. If we have the future proofing of that capability by making sure if the system changes, we change with it, that gives you a lot of not only time to value, but consistent time to value, which is key. The other one we go to is performance. Let's say you get a huge ecosystem, like a big platform application. And when you're looking at it, what we're saying is this agentless process, the way it installs, the way it executes across the system, you get logs that are terabytes in size and scale, and you hit highly performant operations. There's also the efficiency of the way it connects. It's not only performant, but it doesn't affect the production system because of the way it extracts. Sometimes you write queries and you're using an ETL tool, but we don't do that. Our CDC is based on the idea that the minute the transaction hits a commit or it lands inside that database, it's replicated out immediately. So that's a huge facet of the overall system. And now what you think about are 3 core propositions when you're building your data lake. You now have continuous ingest. And what that means is every source, whether there are hundreds of them or 10 or 20, however you do it, from many different systems, that's the heterogeneous, that means that we're generating and automating that process. Lastly, there's one thing that's a consideration when building a data lake. It's these small files or being able to handle for that merging of different records. So if you had usually Hadoop, these are all files, right? So you have to overwrite them over time to combine the data. So you have the big table, the database table you're loading, and table A has yesterday. So table data as of yesterday has to be moved into the larger big data table. We've generated all the Hive logic and scripts using EMR, and we're able to handle for those, whether it's Hive or Spark or however you want to do it, automate that process of generating that code. That's a big differentiator. That's not only future-proofing the source extraction, but actually the target and management of those activities as you're going. So when you do this, the platform is based on the idea that you've got all these different sources and all these different targets, right? And the first extract is a highly optimized extract. It sets it up to partition the threads and all the different aspects of heavy duty loading. That's also very, very important when you think about moving to the cloud. There's also the aspect of how it moves to the cloud. When it moves to, like in S3, it's moving in memory. And when it moves in memory in that persisted store, it's also encrypted and managed entirely by the application. So that's our assurance of security, and that's also your assurance that we know what we're doing, because it goes across web traffic, right? And we're hosting and managing a lot of that security and that consideration for you. Huge opportunity and a huge win for both sides. This also means that there's the idea that you want to remove certain data, PII information, encrypt it, all these different scenarios that you'd want to be able to do. That's part of that transformation. There's also the ability to enrich, like fill in zeros or null fields, those type of things, easy to do as well. But what we are not is an ETL tool. Upstream after this, if you're looking at this, you'd see Glue and other ETL technologies. But the fact that we've got everything in real time, streaming into your data lake, that gives you a very significant, powerful opportunity to be able to do that. And I'm excited for Fanatics to be able to share their story of how they worked with us and how we've built some very powerful solutions. And what I want to do is get into all these different sources and targets. And there's even some conditions, some details on how each one of these move data. When you think about the considerations of a mainframe, they see the DB2 on the database side, all those considerations of even further into the right side. So the left side I have some DB2, but I also have mainframe on the right side. So there's these legacy platforms and ecosystems that are key, and you can look at those. There's also the aspect of SAP, right? Well, how do you extract from SAP? Well, we're actually doing that at the application layer. So the business objects, I'm not talking about the report tool that comes from SAP, but the actual acronyms that you're used to using as a business user gets translated into S3, and that's powerful. So now that we've taken your legacy mainframe, hooked in your SAP, but maybe you've got other applications that are running on custom applications that you've built to run your business on SQL Server, Oracle, or Postgres, or however. Furthermore, they could be running on RDS. We can handle for that. So RDS would be like a Postgres or actually MySQL and Aurora and the rest of those components you can pull and source to these other locations. So let's talk about the targets too. So in the Amazon ecosystem, you've got S3 and EMR and Redshift, and you even have RDS. We have applications and customers that are running real-time reporting, running on an RDS. They're doing real-time windowing on Kinesis, but they're all dumping everything into that S3, and then S3 is loading into Redshift, or they can load into other platform partners like Snowflake, right? There's even the opportunities in other use cases where the data lake vendors are all supporting S3, and like a Hortonworks, Cloudera, and the files are stored in S3. So lots of different ways you could have to work within the overall ecosystem, and a very partner friendly, but also very flexible ecosystem within the Amazon ecosystem and tools. So that's always key. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to our Fanatics friends, and Alan, take it away.
All right, Jordan, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Today I'm cover a few key points in my section of the presentation. First, what I'd like to do is give an introduction to everybody on the call about Fanatics, then talk about why data is important to our organization, how we use Attunity, and then close with some best practices that we've discovered in using Attunity with AWS. So first of all, regarding Fanatics, we are the #1 retailer of licensed sports merchandise. And as some of you may have known or may not know, we started off as a mall store in Jacksonville, Florida in 1997 when the Jacksonville Jaguars were an expansion franchise in the NFL. And over time, we have grown to over $2 billion in sales through online, and I'll talk a little bit more about offline, through our global partners, with our league and team partnerships. And now, today, we run the official league stores for the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball. These partnerships allow us not only to drive the technology that runs their league sites, but also engage in verticalization with the rights to produce what we sell. As I mentioned initially, we were the #1 retailer of licensed sports merchandise, but now we are also moving into manufacturing and Fanatics branded products. This is important to us because in sports, we have what we call the hot markets. That is the championship events, such as the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals, that drives a large spike in customer demand. But equally important is the in-season spikes that are unpredictable and unscheduled. A great player may trend during the season, suddenly make the highlight reel on SportsCenter, and interest in that player who nobody knew at the beginning of the season has suddenly peaked. And we want to be able to meet the customer with the right product at the right time for those unpredicted spikes. And the last part of our business is event retail. I mentioned that we started off as a mall store in '97, over 20 years ago, and have moved to the web with e-commerce. But that's come full circle now, as we also have in-venue locations, places such as the NBA store on Fifth Avenue, trackside at NASCAR, as well as at the Kentucky Derby. So like I said, we're multifaceted capabilities. We're more than just a website. In addition to jerseys and apparel that are licensed from the teams, we are also the largest seller of sports memorabilia. This is the limited edition game used products, as well as partners with specific athletes such as Aaron Judge, the New York Yankees, where we can provide Fanatics customers with a unique experience for really limited release licensed products. So you can see here with all the logos of our partners, from college teams, pro teams, the professional leagues, as well as college sports conferences. So you can see here that you've probably done business with us, even if you didn't know it before this call, with the partnerships that we run, like I said, the league stores, as well as many of the teams. So with all the diverse destinations of Fanatics, it's more than just a website. It is a Fanatics experience, from product discovery, product purchase, to product fulfillment. It is a complete customer life journey. And as we get into the technical piece next, I'll show you how the data that we need to run our business. So for all I've described between online, offline, hot markets, spikes in traffic, spikes in demand, data is very important for us to execute on this vision of being there for the customer journey, providing that Fanatics experience, and being customer-centric from product discovery to product purchase through fulfillment, as well as customer service and returns. So why is data important to us? go into a little bit of these in detail. Right now we have e-commerce as well as offline venues. So being able to merge online and offline data. This is that's omni-channel. So it's not just brick and mortar. It's not just the web, but it's everything in between. Like I mentioned, the dynamic nature of the sports business means that we have to be able to some extent forecast based on previous championship events, but then also, being sure we have the right product at the right time to handle those unexpected spikes. Not all, the highlight reel does not run on a calendar. So, when we look at these data use cases, business intelligence insights, including real-time analytics right after the hot market or on Cyber Monday, Black Friday, making sure that is the business running according to plan? Are there unpredictable are there spikes or maybe a lull that needs to be addressed? On the user experiences on the site, search, personalization, shipping, delivery, experimentation, making sure we have the right data so that our marketing and product teams can make the right customer experiences to create that engagement. Paid marketing, as online traffic becomes more saturated and more competitive, we want to make sure that we are bidding efficiently, driving the right traffic at the right time to the right landing pages to make sure we're getting the correct ROI, for our marketing. Pricing and promotions, right? What price to offer, when to start a promotion, when to end a promotion, what to make the offer, who to offer it to. Those are all important data pieces. And then merchandising and planning, that's inventory management from both inbound, when to buy, how much to buy, when to discount, when to push on clearance, when not to, where should the inventory be within the network of fulfillment centers. All of those pieces are driven by data from various sources. And so when we go to the next slide here, this is the challenge that we're dealing with. We have a variety of apps with our homegrown databases, purchased databases from vendors that were using SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL. So how do we move from the data islands to the data lake, as Jordan and Paul were mentioning earlier? The decision that we made was to use Attunity with AWS, Amazon S3. I want to talk a little bit about sort of where we were in the past, and just to to kind of take us to the present, right? If you consider the legacy systems where people are querying the databases, right, you run several risks. The first of which is that you're now having analytics and transactions running on the same databases. Too many people query it, then the database can lock up and you could possibly stop taking orders, right? This is definitely not good, especially during peak times. The peak times are when most people are interested in seeing how the data is doing. So sure, the first thing you can do is you can separate this and you can create replication. Have the analytics queries run on a separate replicated cluster from the transactional queries. Okay, so at least you can separate those two pieces. However, you still run into the challenge there that, again, if you have contention, right? If too many people are querying the database at the same time, the database locks up and then nobody can do any work. What S3 allows is two important things. First of all, by putting all the data from different sources onto S3, you can bring data from different databases, database systems, database clusters into one place. So you can now join across databases effectively. Second of all, because S3 is a file system, each person can read the file separately without contention. You can have different clusters that read the file, and so one person's query does not block another person's query. This protects users from each other and allows for multiple subscribers to the same data set. So our solution specifically here with AWS and Attunity. In our current state, we have the Attunity software installed on premise in physical hardware pointing to our on-premise databases. The workflow right now is that there are two main data customers that we have, or two customers are interested in consuming the data in two key ways. Either they are interested in the change logs because they want to know how a field in a database has changed over time. Or there are other customers of ours who are interested in running batch jobs, and so they want to know what the database table looked like at a certain period of time. It depends on the latency of the business requirements. So we produce two outputs. One is we can produce change logs for a database that customers can subscribe to, our internal data customers can subscribe to, so they can read the change log and run their applications accordingly. Or they can subscribe to the current view, which is basically a snapshot that runs either hourly or daily, and read that for their batch process. So right now we are micro-batching, where we Attunity sends to S3 in our settings all the change logs every 15 minutes, because that's based on what the customer's data needs have been for now. And then we process those and build current views. In the future, we're doing several things that we're looking at and have been in the process of developing. One is moving our Attunity installation into the cloud, into AWS. We're moving this way because the data customers and the team that's processing the data is more familiar with AWS applications, so it makes sense to move the Attunity replication piece to the cloud as well. This is important, and I'll touch on this more during the best practices as to why we move this to the cloud. It's partially organizational, with having the data platforms team and the team responsible for Attunity being in the same group. The second benefit of moving Attunity to the cloud is that it frees up hardware. Attunity is currently installed on physical machines in our data center. By moving it to the cloud, it frees up that hardware to be repurposed, salvaged, what have you. Another future state we are exploring is ingesting data through Kafka, or pushing data to Kafka. As I mentioned in a couple slides ago, we're currently micro-batching every 15 minutes, and that's good enough right now for most of our data customers. However, if data customers are interested in reading changes more frequently than that, we can push change logs to Kafka as well. And that way the data customers can ingest a stream of data for the tables or databases that they're interested in, and they can see every change log come in as a unique message and then process those as needed. Additionally, this allows for compaction. So in the previous model, we have pushed data every 15 minutes, and so there's files cut at that frequency. By pushing data here through the Kafka stream, afterwards, right, you can, what you're interested in, you can put that into a file later if you want. So on to best practices and lessons learned. And these three best practices, as a preface, dovetail with each other. I'll explain how. The first is that the Attunity installation and data consumption owned by the same team. In the past, our database administrators who maintained the on-premise application databases were involved in the Attunity installation and Attunity replicate maintenance piece. And this made sense when Attunity was installed on-premise. However, now what happened was the data producers, effectively, if you're looking from the Attunity piece, Attunity is producing changelog data, and the data consumers, the data teams that are interested in consuming it and reading the change logs or reading the current views were now on separate teams. The data platform team was in the middle that helped publish this data to our data scientists. And that was a separate team from the team that's involved in the installation and maintenance of Attunity. This led to sort of separated concerns. And by having the data platforms team involved in the installation and loading of the tables of Attunity, that allows for more end-to-end visibility to match that Attunity. The Attunity file was Attunity software was configured to output was the most efficient for consumption on the data platform's ingest end. So to the extent possible, you can make these two under the same organization and sort of within the same team or pod. That will allow for more efficiency in operations. And the second piece is correctly understanding the data frequency requirements. As Jordan noted, right, the Attunity does allow for real-time change logs and to see the data in real time. However, make sure that is what your business team needs, because if you cut your files too frequently, you'll end up in the third problem, which is that understand the trade-off between file size and file I/O operations. Depending on what you need, right, it may be more efficient to read a few large files than a lot of small files, especially depending on what processes you're using to read the data. And so you want to make sure that you're not pushing too many small files if the business says, I only need the data updated every 30 minutes, depending on what you're using the process for. If you're trying to build a real-time dashboard, for sure, cut more frequent files, maybe use a Kafka connector. But if you're doing things, like daily warehouse resource planning or something like that, that even if you had the information, you couldn't affect anything material until it was on a daily basis, then maybe and the data doesn't change that often, set your parameters accordingly to make it the most efficient for your specific use case. And you can have multiple use cases within your organization or even within an application. Attunity allows that flexibility, and just make sure that you use it to make the tool suit you, because Attunity has that flexibility for you. So the key takeaways here are that Fanatics chose AWS for its multiple data platforms and its applications that Paul showed earlier, from S3, Redshift, Athena, allowing those flexibility of tools available in AWS is why we chose to go with Amazon Web Services. And we chose Attunity due to its easy connection to a variety of data sources, like I showed you, whether it be Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, and especially now with the latest version of Attunity, the UI has become even more user-friendly. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate this. Okay, so we have time now for some questions and answers, but before I do that, I'd like to remind all the attendees that the PowerPoint presentation will be available through SlideShare, along with a recording of the webinar we posted on YouTube, and you will receive an email that will be sent 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of this event. So when you get that information, that email, it will have the information, the links to get the slides and to view the actual recording on YouTube. I also would like to remind everybody to please remain connected after the webinar ends and complete the brief survey at the conclusion. Your feedback is very important to us, and so that's really important that you actually submit that feedback into that survey. So I'm going to go ahead and handle some questions now. We have a number of questions came in around data lakes and Attunity and file format. Some are similar. I'm going to kind of group them together. So I'm going to direct this towards Jordan and kind of summarizing what does Attunity support in terms of what file formats does it support? How do you deal with metadata? Is there automation for metadata and data lineage? Are those things that you can do with Attunity? And if so, how would you do that?
Absolutely, and great question. So we support file types. Our in-memory file lands into S3 in memory, so it's actually really powerful for being able to overwrite file types like a Parquet file, which is one of the file types that you often see. But we also support Avro and JSON formats. If you really want to store it in CSV, you can do it, or a text file. But like all of the aspects of when you overwrite these files requires you to have a header information to that, not only like the detail of the header, but then the landing detail. So that there's also these secondary file types, and also we can add these other sets of files called change tracking and audit tables, which are part of the overall ecosystem of compliance. Let's say you're going to run a Spark EMR operation that would then come off and give you that replay reel of all the transactions that came in, whether it's a delete or some other format of that concept. And what you're doing is you've got the ability with Replicate to then also generate those Hive statements entirely using our Compose product. So the Compose product works with a lot of metadata and governance tools. If it's a data lake, you can load into Atlas. Our metadata is a RESTful integration, so you can pull into a data catalog on the Amazon side. So that all of the questions, the answer is yes to everything, but I wanted to at least give you some of those details. If you have more questions, just throw it in the chat, and happy to answer more.
Okay, thank you for that, Jordan. I'm going to go ahead and throw a question towards Alan now. There's some interest in how you plan on leveraging Kafka and what might be some of the trade-offs you have using Kafka.
Sure. So we're still in our early phases of exploring how our teams could use the Kafka stream. I think common possible applications are with personalization on the site, potentially email marketing, as the data comes in, with our product pricing changes to let customers know, hey, a new product maybe on promotion, etc. I think the challenge with Kafka, one of the potential challenges, right, is that the Kafka model is one producer, and then each application is responsible for writing their own consumers. So I think that there's that knowledge that needs to be sort of either well democratized, or each individual team needs to come up to speed on how to use the Kafka consumers in a way specific for their applications, as opposed to pushing the data to an endpoint for them.
Okay, I think this is also a related question. Is that maybe for you, Alan? Is that what is the benefit of batching your change logs versus getting data in real time? Since we're kind of talking around Kafka and streaming and such.
Yeah, so I think this the benefits of batching is that and again, this is very application and use case specific. If your process is only going to run every 3 hours for whatever reason, again, this is if there's a use case where you only need the data in a certain period of time, right? The batch of the data should match the frequency of its use, so that you can you don't have to start up the cluster or keep it on all the time, when most of the time it's going to be idle. So you just kind of match data supply, if you will, with data demand. If you stream all the data through, or you cut small files, then we've noticed in cases of Spark, sometimes you end up with having to read through a lot of small files, which can take your process to run longer than if the file had just been one big file.
Okay, thank you. So this is going to be for Jordan at Attunity. There's a question around basically how will there be any downtime experience when you move data from on-premises environments into AWS cloud using Attunity Replicate? And also, how long is there latency involved? What does it take to move all the data from your on-premises into AWS?
Yeah, so this is one of the benefits of why Replicate is the caching mechanisms that are built into that intermediate zone. We were talking about the persistent zone. And this is one of those fundamentally important things. So the reason you use a CDC tool is to not impact the source operations. So as it captures like a commit, the database goes, the records go into the database on the transaction side. But let's say you want to read them for analytics, you need to move them somewhere else. So as you're moving them somewhere else, the ability to capture them very efficiently and do it in a trickle, right? Think of like water flowing versus like picking up a bucket one at a time. It's water flowing down of a tube. It's much more efficient way of processing information. So as you're looking at it from the downtime, let's say that source system goes down, the transactions go down. So well, Replicate's still listening, and it's doing the whole kid in the back seat. Are you there yet? And what it's doing is it's making sure that you can capture the records as the thing comes back up. There may have been a cache of records that come churning in. That must be able to be collected and understood. Even if there's a backup, let's say that a backup occurred while it was down, you could also recover from the backup. So that gives you a lot of flexibility to be able to do point-in-time recovery as well. So lots of flexibility and inherent understanding of the problem are built into the tool.
Okay, and you use the term CDC, which change data capture. What well, basically, what do you support in terms of sources and such for using CDC technology?
So a lot of those databases that were on that sources slide, if we were to go back to our section, and we'll be distributing those, there's all the major relational databases, the ones that are the primary, 99% of the databases are Oracle and SQL and Postgres and MySQL. And a lot of use cases in that relational world, that's where CDC fits. Any database that has a transaction log, we capture it. So 40 different sources, I think, is the current listing. So that's part of the core of that value proposition.
Okay, great. There's a few questions came in around specifically how you do data lakes in S3 in terms of how you structure your data lakes. I'm going to go ahead and kind of take a stab at this. It's really, the question was, how do you structure your data on S3 for data lake? Do you split it into raw or curated zones? And it really comes down to the use case of your analytics processing, what you need to do. It's a very common pattern to have the raw data collected, ingested and collected into S3, and then you will, if you look at remember the pipeline, it goes from ingestion to store and then to analysis and processing. At that point, there you may, when you have the collected data on S3, you then may process it or analyze it and reprocess it and distill it down into other types of data, and you would then typically redeposit that data back into S3 as well, maybe into another bucket or something, or however you organize your data lake. But the advantage of that is that all your data lives in the same fundamental location, and you can mix your structured and unstructured data. But it really depends on what your consumers are expecting and how you want to analyze the data in that data lake. Depends on how you structure it. Let's see here. I think another question for Attunity we have is how do I move data between AWS regions? If I have data in one location and I want to move to another one, how do I do that? That'll be you, Jordan, I think.
Yep, I was just coming off of mute. So when we take in a different source system, so you can migrate and batch from one S3 instance to another, but also S3 has its own replication model for doing that as well. So if you're going across multiple regions, we often replicate at the source. So the source can read once and write many. And what we're looking at is being able to read from those sources and then being able to point them in two directions. That's from the same source that only extracted once. Very powerful technique. And what that means is you can load both segments at the same time. And we often want to capture it at the source and not when it gets to the target. So you're not waiting on the latency of the either one. It's just the transport of getting it there. So that's kind of our core methodology for this. Thanks, man.
Okay, some more questions actually for you, Jordan. So around the CDC, basically, what format does the CDC deliver data in, and how do you process to get the current state? Do you need a database engine on the ingest side, or are you pulling directly from the engines themselves, the logs, and those kind of things?
Well, we're pulling from the logs. Are you talking about the initial ingest? The initial
Yes.
ingest is a full, is actually can be partitioned and optimized for extraction. but it's
Okay.
really a full database extract. So it does have a cost to it. Instead of having that low latency extraction, it's got a lot of, it still has to do that initial load, which irregardless is going to be something you have to consider when you're doing this.
Okay. But after initial load and then the changes, you capture through the logs as well. That's correct?
Yeah, and it just runs.
Yep.
That's the nice
Okay.
part.
There's a question around some governance and regulatory information. So, what does Attunity do to provide things around auditing and logging of the activities are happening through Replicate, as well as does Attunity do anything in particular to ensure that the data it remains secure?
Yeah, so underneath the covers, there's a couple of ways you can handle for security. When it hits the target, there's different vendors that you can work with that you can help for the encryption, like keys, and then they can identify the PII informations and then encrypt that data. But while it's in transit, it's already managed entirely by our compression and encryption technology that's part of our file channel. So that entirely keeps it managed in under the, I guess, the domain of Attunity's processing.
Okay.
So it manages all that.
Sure. There was a question I saw for Attunity here. Sorry, Fanatics. I'm trying to find it. Let's see here. I got a lot of questions came all of a sudden here, so I'm a little behind on this. Let's see. Oh yeah. So there's actually a question: what BI tools does Fanatics use for the data?
Sure. So we currently use a mixture of some homegrown reporting systems as well as Tableau and MicroStrategy.
Okay. And do you have any lessons learned from that BI solution?
I don't have anything to offer specifically at this time on the BI team. I can find out, but the BI team is one of many data customers for us, and they mostly consume the data in a batch format. We have separate pipelines for custom reporting for more real-time data.
Sure. Okay. Actually, one final question I have for Eternity that came in was, how does Attunity handle the updated data records? Because S3, you basically write a new record every time. Is that what Attunity is doing when data comes in and updates a record? Is it rewriting a new record, or how are you handling that? Jordan, are you still there?
Yeah, I was talking into mute, which is terrible. Sorry about that. No, can you repeat that again? That was
There's a question around basically how you handle updates to existing records that are in S3, because S3 is obviously object-based,
immutable.
and
Yep.
it doesn't support the ability to append to an object. So what does Attorney do and handle in that situation? How does Attorney handle that?
Well, what it does is it keeps metadata and then it overwrites the file. Being that it's in memory, it completely processes it.
Okay. Okay. I think that basically handles most of the questions that came in, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this webinar. I do want to remind all the attendees that there are we have some next steps information. If you want to get a free trial with Attunity Solutions, there's a link there you can go to, as well as learning more about the solutions in AWS and learning more about Fanatics as well. And these slides, as a reminder, these slides will be distributed in a couple days. There'll be a link provided in an email to you that will list where to download the slides and the YouTube video of the webinar. And also, please remember to stay connected and complete the brief survey at the conclusion, because we do need your feedback. It is very important to us, and we look forward to supporting you in your current and future projects. And thank you again, everybody, and have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.